International Monetary Fund says Ghana's domestic gold purchase program, which was run by the Bank of Ghana to build the country's gold reserves and supply foreign exchange to the market, generated losses of about 22 billion Ghana cedi in 2025. According to the fund, these losses were equivalent to about 1.5% of Ghana's gross domestic product. The fund also stressed on broader challenges in Ghana's artisanal and small-scale mining sector, including persistent gold smuggling, limited tax revenue following the removal of the 1.4% withholding tax on unprocessed precious minerals, and the environmental damage caused by illegal mining. To get more on the loss, of course, Head of Research here at Joining Isaac Kofiaji joins me in studio to break down the numbers. That's a big figure behind it.
Yeah. And MFR, when the Bank of Ghana released their report, everybody's attention was the net loss associated with the gold purchase program, which was roughly around 9 billion Ghana cedis. But today we are realizing from that fresh report released by the IMF around midnight that the total losses associated with the DGPP is 22 billion cedis, and that's the figure you can find on the smartphone. Our calculations based on the data that the IMF put out shows the Bank of Ghana and Gold Board, which was at the center of this whole gold purchase program, purchased a total of about 144 billion Ghana cedis worth of gold in 2025, and they made a loss of 15.37% or 15.3% of that total, and that's giving you this big figure of 2022. Now, when I was reading the report, one thing stood out, and the first thing the IMF said about this whole losses was that it made the Bank of Ghana's financials very unsustainable in the year 2025. And in fact, they praised the government for transferring that burden from the Bank of Ghana in terms of the Gold Board to the Finance Ministry. And in fact, because of this same gold purchase program that resulted in 22 billion in loss, the central government had to pay the Bank of Ghana some 5 billion Ghana cedis. And they said that as a result of that, it nearly caused us not to pass our final assessment of the IMF program. We had to write to the fund to request for a waiver before we finally passed the IMF program. And so what we are bringing to you is this big loss of 22 billion that is currently sitting on the books of the Bank of Ghana. And we know that they are getting assistance from the government to actually offset some of this loss, because we all know that because of some of these huge losses, the Bank of Ghana has recorded a big negative equity, which is simply because of the GGPP, the forest losses, and other OMO operations that they carried out in the year 2025. Interestingly, what we also saw in that report is the forex intervention done by the Bank of Ghana since May of 2025. Between May of 2025 and May of 2026, they had intervened in the market nearly 13 billion Ghana cedis. And there's a chart that I saw that is a bit disturbing. Now, what you see is that in the year 2025, when we were injecting on average about $1 billion in the market, it was helping the city to stabilize. But this year, the interventions are there, but they are not being responsive. And the city is not responding to that. You see the chart, and it's very disappointing. It's a bit disturbing. If you also look at the chart, it shows you how the bank says that, well, the IMF says that the bank will publish that they were intervening in the markets with a certain figure. But there were discrepancies between what they published and then what they actually auctioned. So there were discrepancies in there that the fund or the IMF actually raised. But interestingly, within a span of just 1 year, May 2025 and May 2026, the Bank of Ghana had to cough 13 billion US dollars to actually intervene in the market. Unfortunately, this year, it has not been working like it did in 2025.
This is suggest that if this amount was a little less, the CD would be woefully performed.
Absolutely. That but for this, we could have seen more pressure at the pumps, because this is what is keeping the city healthy. And we know how the health of the city has held the price at the pumps relatively lower than we all projected it to be. Even with a small, depreciation of about 10%, before seeing how diesel nearly reached about 20 Ghana cedis per liter, and government had to come in with that reduction of about 2 cedis on the liter of diesel. So although this has not been really responsive like it did in 2025, I think that it has given us some form of relief at the pumps.
We'll pay for it later.
Absolutely.
Well, later on, beyond the numbers, you give us the details, the form and shape in which the gold board is losing, how the variables accounting for that. But thank you. Now, joining us via Zoom is Director of the Institute of Economic Research and Public Policy, Dr. Frank Bano. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. So the IMF acknowledges that transferring the domestic gold purchase program to gold board should reduce the Bank of Ghana's fiscal risk. Yet your statement that we've cited earlier argues that the risk to taxpayers remains. Why do you believe that transfer alone is not enough?
Thank you very much, Amefa. A very good afternoon to you and your listeners. So, Amefa, if you read through the report, specifically the page 10 and then paragraph 14 of the report, now there is something interesting, Amefa, that is captured within the report. Now, it says that the costs are expected to be brought down to 5% of gold purchase. That is with this particular cost that we are looking at it in today about 1.7 billion. And then the report goes on to say that some progress has been made in 2026 quarter one, with these costs down from 14.5% in 2025 to 11.4%.
Yes.
Now, MFL, pay attention here. What are the drivers of these costs and how the reduction was achieved? Now, this was done notably through the halving of assay fees.
Come again on that. Come again on that.
So it says that this reduction, which was reduction from 14.5% to 11.4% as the quarter one of 2026, was achieved through halving of assay fees, service charges, and other logistical costs. So, MFA, this actually stimulates a very interesting story. Now, this tells us that, look, so were these charges that have been paid to uptakers, to logistics movement, is it a case that these charges have been inflated or they were inflated? If indeed there was nothing fishy as far as these charges was concerned, then how come that within that short time that the IMF came on board, the BOG through gold bonds was able to halve charges, and this brought the cost from 14.5%
down
to about 11.4%. So this actually stimulates an interesting story, which calls for a parliamentary scrutiny. And MFI, if you recall, somewhere in December 2025, the minority in Parliament called for a bipartisan probe into the activities of Gold Board. And in particular, one of the things that they talked about was the fact that off-takers fees and other logistical charges that they thought that they may have been inflated, and for that matter, there ought to be an independent audit in some of these payments that were done. So if you read through the IMF report and you try to juxtapose it to some of the concerns that was read, it really reinforces the point that there will be the need for a bipartisan parliamentary inquiry into the activities of Gold Board for us to know whether indeed some payments that were made were legitimate and lawful, and if not, then these funds need to be clawed back into the coffers of the Ghanaian people.
I see. So in the form of investigation or probing, you request parliamentary probe, you're requesting an independent audit of the program, and what more? What information do you believe Ghanaians will now uncover? Or after this audit, what are we likely to discover?
MFA, it is not just about the losses, it's also about the environmental costs that we are currently facing. Now,
why? Because of the constant engagement of the small-scale miners? Or?
Exactly, because we know that the gold that is being